no judge. It gives nothing freely, and it takes what it wants. Tonight, we enter its court. On one side, Viking Warbands, men hardened by brine and winter, standing shoulder to shoulder in longships carved like dragon jaws. They carry axes that split shields, spears balanced for the throw, tar-soaked torches that set the night alight, and a quiet confidence of crews that have crossed open water by stars alone. On the other side, a legend that sailors whispered about when the wind died. The Kraken, a mass of muscle and suction and cold intent, a mine from the abyss, that hunts without mercy and disappears without trace. If a storm-tossed North Atlantic became a proving ground, who would seize it? Could disciplined oars, overlapping shields, and the geometry of a shield wall translate to the shifting deck of a longship? Would tar, fire, and thrown javelins bite deep enough into wet flesh to matter? Does a creature the size of a hull think like a beast? Or does it test a fleet the way a commander tests a line? Imagine an alternate coastline stitched from several centuries of Norse memory. A chain of basalt islands, fjords knifing inland, kelp forests thick as snares, and 30 longships arcing out from a harbor that stinks of pitch. The sun withdraws behind low cloud. The water turns the color of hammered iron. Men call to one another in clipped commands, and the keels slide into a long swell. Beneath them, a pressure change, a shadow larger than any hull. This is not a duel in a field. It is a contested environment in 3 dimensions. Wind, current, wave period, and the simple reach of tentacles become terrain. Oars can be trapped. Ropes can be weapons or liabilities. Fire can terrify a beast or draw it like a beacon. The Vikings know tides and reefs. The Kraken knows the column of water from the surface to the black. What happens when human cohesion meets in human scale? Do the Vikings form a floating hedgehog of spear points, lash ships gunwale to gunwale, and force the creature into a kill zone? Does the Kraken strike from below, flip a ship to sow panic, then circle back to peel away the isolated? If the battle stretches into a second tide, which side suffers from fatigue first, the crews rowing against wind and fear, or the hunter that must surface to strike? We will build the battlefield, test the tools, and follow the action moment by moment. The sea will judge. The question remains open. To understand the Viking warbands as combatants in this oceanic nightmare, we must begin not with their weapons, but with their worldview. For Vikings, the sea was not merely a passage between raids, it was their inheritance, their proving ground, and sometimes their grave. Their sagas are filled with imagery of storm gods, sea serpents, and voyages into the unknown. Men who boarded longships did so with an almost ritual acceptance that death could be waiting at the horizon. This hardened psychology forms the first weapon in their arsenal: fearlessness in the face of the deep. Their longships were both tools and symbols of this maritime power. Crafted with clinker-built planks, overlapping like scales, they were flexible enough to ride the waves instead of fighting them. A crew of 40 to 60 warriors could maneuver with precision, powered by oars and a single square sail. These vessels were shallow-drafted, allowing not only coastal landings, but also rapid changes of course. Against a sea monster, this agility might be the only defense, a chance to avoid being caught broadside by a tentacle thicker than a man's torso. Weapons carried aboard were optimized for versatility. The axe, the most iconic of Viking arms, could shear through shields, rigging, or flesh. Spears, both for thrusting and throwing, were in abundance. Shields themselves, round and wooden with iron bosses, could interlock into floating barriers. Some warbands carried bows, though their short range might prove limited against a creature that dwells beneath. Perhaps most potent was fire. Vikings understood pitch and oil, and they carried torches in raids. The question is whether flames, so effective against men and timber, would terrify or even enrage. Something born of the abyss. Tactics were rooted in cohesion. Vikings trained to form shield walls on land, but at sea, Their coordination shifted to rowing rhythm and command shouts. They could lash ships together to create a floating platform, transforming individual longships into a crude fortress at sea. In a battle against the Kraken, this could cut both ways. Strength in numbers, but also immobility if tentacles found their mark. Leadership was personal and immediate. A jarl or war leader did not command from a distant hill. He stood on the prow, axe in hand, the first to strike and often the last to leave. Such presence could steady morale in the chaos of a monster's attack. And morale mattered. Against a human foe, discipline and rage could overcome hesitation. Against a mythic leviathan, even the stoutest hearts might falter if comrades vanished into the sea, dragged by unseen limbs. Another factor lies in Viking adaptability. These were raiders who studied enemies on the fly, turning local resources into weapons, shifting tactics mid-battle. If the Kraken could be baited, lured toward shallows, or ensnared and weighted nets, Vikings might adapt quickly enough to exploit such openings. Their culture of improvisation, using what is at hand, seizing opportunity, cannot be discounted. Yet vulnerabilities exist. A longship's light frame, designed to flex, could be split by pressure from below. Oars could be snapped like twigs if caught. Panic among rowers would break rhythm, leaving ships vulnerable to capsizing. Shields, strong against arrows and axes, would splinter under crushing force. Even the bravest berserker, howling in rage, might find his fury irrelevant when seized by a limb longer than his entire ship. So the Viking Warband enters this battle as a paradox. Supremely skilled mariners with weapons honed for human war, unyielding courage, and flexible tactics, yet fragile when measured against the sheer magnitude of a leviathan. They are hunters of men and coastal towns, but tonight they sail into the realm of the hunted. The Kraken does not belong to history in the way the Vikings do. It belongs to the space between fact and terror, where sailors' voices lowered and stories grew longer with every retelling. First described in Norse sagas and later echoed in Scandinavian lore, the Kraken was said to dwell in the cold waters of the North Atlantic. To some, it was a single creature, ancient and singular. To others, it was a species, an apex predator the size of islands. What unites the legends is scale, a beast so large that ships mistook its back for land, only to be dragged into the depths when the island shifted. Its form, though never consistently described, is commonly imagined as a cephalopod, tentacles stretching dozens of meters, lined with suction cups capable of crushing hulls, or pulling men into the sea. Eyes the size of shields, a beak hidden at the center, capable of slicing through bone and timber. Unlike the Viking warrior, who has a defined limit of reach and stamina, the Kraken's limbs are many and simultaneous. It can strike from multiple angles, above and below, confusing its prey and overwhelming defenses. But to understand the Kraken as a combatant, we must consider its logic. Does it think like a predator, striking for food, or like a territorial force, attacking anything that intrudes upon its domain? If it is intelligent, it may test ships before committing, rocking them with currents, probing with a tentacle, waiting for panic to create openings. If it is more instinctive, it may strike with sudden violence, overwhelming before prey has time to react. Either approach has battlefield consequences. The Kraken's advantages are immense. First is raw power. Legends describe it pulling down entire ships, not one at a time, but whole fleets by creating whirlpools in its wake. A Viking longship, with its shallow draft, could perhaps avoid deep suction vortices, but the effect of water displacement alone could scatter. Formation. Second is endurance. A creature of the deep is built to withstand pressure that would crush a man instantly. Spears and axes may pierce its flesh, but how deep would they need to strike to matter? Unlike a human army that bleeds and weakens visibly, the Kraken could absorb punishment and continue its assault, its very mass becoming a weapon of attrition. Then there is the terrain. the ocean itself. While Vikings understand currents and tides, the Kraken is the sea's child. It moves in 3 dimensions. A longship exists only on the surface. The Kraken can strike from below, from the flanks, or coil upward like a storm. Its very environment provides concealment. Beneath opaque waves, its approach is heralded not by sight, but by sudden silence of birds, a shift in current, or the unnatural swell of water around the hull. Yet the Kraken is not without vulnerabilities. Its very size may limit agility in shallower waters. If drawn near reefs or fjord walls, tentacles could entangle or expose themselves to concentrated attack. Fire on the surface might not kill it, but if heat or smoke disrupted its sensitive tissues, the creature could retreat. And if truly cephalopod in nature, it may have a central brain or vital cluster of organs, difficult to reach, but decisive if struck. Another weakness lies in mystery itself. Because no man has cataloged the Kraken, it cannot be fully predicted. Is it solitary, or does it call others of its kind? Does it hunt continuously, or must it rest after exertion? The answers would tilt the balance. Dramatically, a solitary strike leaves room for Viking endurance to shine. A sustained assault, or the nightmare of multiple leviathans, would crush even the fiercest fleet. So the Kraken enters. This imagined battle as a force of elemental scale, part predator, part storm, part myth. Where the Viking Warbands are men defined by courage, cohesion, and craft, the Kraken is defined by immensity, unpredictability, and the crushing physics of the deep. Together, they form the ingredients of a clash not simply of warriors and monster, but of culture versus abyss, willpower versus inevitability. The battlefield is the open North Atlantic, just beyond the shelter of jagged fjords. It is twilight, the sky painted in streaks of iron gray and crimson. 30 Viking longships form a crescent, their sails furled, relying on oars to maintain position. Torches flicker in iron brackets, throwing shards of orange light onto wet shields. The men chant rhythmically, both to keep time and to steel their courage. Beneath them, unseen, the water thickens with presence. The first sign is silence. Seabirds vanish. The steady hiss of waves dulls, replaced by an unnatural stillness. Then, a bulge, water rising in a slow dome between the ships. Men grip their weapons tighter, oars falter. A single tentacle breaches, slick and glistening, thicker than a mast. It slaps the surface with a sound like thunder, spraying the nearest crew in salt and fear. Phase 1. First contact. The Vikings respond as they would against human ambush. Horn sound. The outer ships loose a volley of spears and arrows, their points flashing against the dim sky. Some strike true, embedding in rubbery flesh, but the Kraken does not recoil. Instead, more tentacles unfurl, lashing outward. One longship is caught broadside, and her snapped like a twig. Warriors scramble to hack at the encroaching limb, axes biting deep but failing to sever. The beast drags the ship half under, then releases, letting it roll back upright in chaos. Phase 2. Consolidation. The Jarl calls for cohesion. Ropes fly, lashing hull to hull, creating a floating shield wall of timber. Warriors cluster at the edges, shields interlocked, spears bristling like a hedgehog at sea. Fire is brought forward, torches dipped in pitch, hurled onto the writhing limbs. Flames hiss and gutter, some clinging briefly before being drowned. The creature withdraws slightly, perhaps irritated, perhaps calculating. For a moment, the Vikings believe the fire has driven it back. But the Kraken does not retreat. It dives. The sea itself convulses. Currents surge against the lashed ships, pulling them askew. Then, without warning, a tentacle bursts up from beneath the center of the flotilla, snapping a hull in two. Men tumble into the froth. The Kraken has shifted tactics, probing from below instead of striking from the sides. Phase 3. Escalation. Now the battle fractures. Some ships break formation, rowing furiously for open water. Others double down, chanting louder, striking with renewed fury. A berserker, stripped to the waist and bloodied, leaps from the prow onto a tentacle, hacking wildly as the creature thrashes. He vanishes in spray, swallowed by the sea. His sacrifice steals his comrades, who roar back with defiance. The Kraken begins circling, creating a vortex. Smaller ships spin, unable to hold course. Or snap, men are thrown. Yet here, Viking seamanship shows. Crews accustomed to storm waters counter-row, adjusting to the pull. A few vessels slip free of the whirl, maneuvering to flank the beast. Javelins are from their decks, aimed at the glistening head that briefly surfaces, its eye-reflecting torchlight like a polished shield. One javelin sinks deep, and the creature recoils in fury, slamming down with a tentacle that capsizes the attackers instantly. Phase 4, Turning Point. As the night deepens, fatigue sets in. Vikings row against currents, their arms heavy, their voices ragged. Yet desperation fuels ingenuity. Nets are thrown over a thrashing limb, weighted with stones, entangling its movements. Warriors swarm to hack at the bound appendage, severing chunks of flesh that slide into the sea. For the first time, the Kraken seems slowed. Its thrashing becomes less precise, it strikes less coordinated, but the victory is incomplete. Even wounded, the Kraken retains mass and reach. Another ship is crushed against a reef, splintering like kindling. Men scream in the darkness, their torches extinguished by spray. The sea runs with blood, some human, some not. Phase 5, Climax. The final exchange comes as both sides falter. The Vikings, fewer now, cluster around the Jarl's ship, forming a last floating citadel of fire and steel. They ignite their sails, turning them into blazing banners against the night, daring the Kraken to close. Drawn or enraged, it rises its bulk, breaking the surface, water cascading from limbs that seem endless. Men hurl axes, spears, and torches with every ounce of remaining strength. The beast strikes, seizing 2 ships at once, dragging them beneath. But in its exposed state, the Vikings strike back with concentrated fury. Axes bite near its eye, torches sear against its flesh. A howl, or something like it, rolls across the waves. Then, with a final convulsion, the Kraken slips beneath, leaving only a churning wake and shattered timber in its absence. What remains is silence once more. The survivors clutch broken oars, drifting amid wreckage. The sea, indifferent, closes over the wounds of battle. Would the Kraken return at dawn, or had the Vikings earned a reprieve through blood and fire? That is the question the sea does not answer. The battle leaves behind more questions than answers, and that is the nature of pitting history against myth. Still, when we sift through the evidence of our simulation, several decisive factors emerge that could tilt the outcome toward one side or the other. First, scale versus coordination. The Kraken's greatest strength lies in its size and reach. Against timber and muscle, its tentacles can overwhelm with crushing force, pulling men and ships alike into the abyss. Yet size can also be a liability. In narrow fjords or shallows, the beast's limbs could entangle or lose leverage, and Viking crews might concentrate their attacks. Against a single tentacle, dozens of spears and axes could find their mark, severing flesh and weakening the creature's grip. Second, environment. On open seas, the Kraken thrives, striking from below with no warning. In tighter waters, the Vikings' knowledge of reefs, tides, and currents could provide traps, drawing the beast into a bottleneck or toward burning debris could shift momentum. Terrain, in this case, is the sea itself, and whichever side bends it better gains the edge. Third, weapons and adaptability. Viking axes and spears were not designed for leviathans, but their use of fire and nets demonstrates tactical imagination. Fire might not kill the Kraken, but it could cause hesitation or retreat. Nets, weighted with stone, could slow or entrap limbs. These improvisations, if coordinated across multiple ships, might allow Vikings to exploit the creature's rare vulnerabilities. Yet, even in success, they would suffer staggering losses. A warband is not an endless army. Each warrior lost reduces the cohesion and morale of the fleet. Fourth, morale and psychology. Viking warriors thrived on defiance, embracing the possibility of death in battle as a passage to Valhalla. This mindset steels them against panic, even when facing an incomprehensible foe. But courage has limits. Witnessing comrades dragged screaming into the sea could crack even hardened hearts. Conversely, if the warband inflicted a visible wound, a severed limb, a blinded eye, the morale surge could ignite desperate fury strong enough to buy survival. When we weigh these elements, several outcomes become plausible. Scenario 1. Open water. In the broad, deep sea, the Kraken has the clear advantage. It can strike from unseen angles, capsize ships with vortex currents, and drag down vessels faster than the Vikings can counter. Over time, fatigue and attrition would break the warband, leaving scattered survivors to drift among wreckage. Scenario 2. Coastal ambush. If the Vikings lured the Kraken toward shorelines or fjords, their chances rise. Trapped in constricted waters, the creature would lose the freedom of maneuver. Concentrated missile fire, nets, and burning pitch could inflict real damage. Though still costly, such a battle might end with the Kraken retreating to the depths, wounded, and the Vikings claiming survival as victory. Scenario 3. The unknown variable. If the Kraken is more intelligent than assumed, capable of learning, adapting, or even summoning others of its kind, the scale tips heavily in its favor. No warband, however skilled, could endure against multiple leviathans or a foe that anticipates their every tactic. Yet if it is more beast than mastermind, instinctive and reckless, a disciplined Viking formation might exploit its predictability. So who would win? The Kraken has overwhelming power and the home field advantage of the sea. The Vikings bring ingenuity, fire, and unbreakable will. In most scenarios, the cost to the warbands would be near annihilation, but under rare, favorable conditions, they might bloody the monster enough to survive. Not victory, perhaps, but defiance that would echo into saga and song. The clash of Viking warbands against the Kraken is more than a battle. It is a confrontation between human will and the unknowable depths. The Vikings embody rage, discipline, and a refusal to yield, armed with steel, fire, and courage. The Kraken embodies the alien power of nature, a force beyond scale or mercy. Together, they remind us that history and myth are never far apart. But what if the battlefield changed? What if the encounter happened not in open sea, but under the glow of the midnight sun, with calm waters giving Vikings greater visibility? Could they coordinate volleys of arrows and fire before the Kraken breached? Or imagine winter seas, packed with drifting ice. Would the floes shield the longships, or trap them as the beast struck from below? And what if the Vikings had prepared with siege engines on deck, ballistae or catapults retrofitted from coastal raids? Would the Leviathan withstand repeated barges, or would its hide eventually yield? Equally, consider the creature itself. If the Kraken is territorial, the Vikings might have survived by withdrawal, learning that no man can claim every stretch of sea. But if it hunts out of hunger, would retreat matter, or would the warband be stalked across waves until the last torch faded? These possibilities leave the door open for you, the viewer. Which scenario do you believe most likely? Do you side with the ingenuity and defiance of men who carve their names across coasts and sagas, or with the inexorable strength of a monster older than their gods? Tell us in the comments. Who do you think wins this battle of rage versus tentacles? Could the Vikings truly scar a legend of the sea, or is this fight proof that even the fiercest of human warriors are small? Beneath the waves. If you enjoyed this clash, consider what might come next. What if the Mongol horde faced a dragon across the steppes? What if Roman legions held their line against giants of Norse myth? Or what if a modern navy encountered a creature thought lost to legend? This is Warface No Limit, where imagination and analysis meet on the battlefield. Subscribe to join future campaigns. Share your own theories and help decide which clash we explore next. Somewhere between history and legend, the war is never over.